Morning, I'm Raven Gray, and today's topic is guns and gun culture. We are asking, what are your views on guns with regard to ownership, safety and controls? To share your thoughts on the air, please call us on 415-663-8492. So we already have a caller, actually.
We do have a caller. Let's
Okay.
see what's going on. Good morning. You're on Let's Talk on KWMR. You're on the air. What's your name, please?
Yes, hello, this is Mariam.
Mariam, how are you this
Mariam.
morning?
I'm good, thank you. How are you
Morning.
guys doing?
So far, so good. No bloodshed yet.
Thank you so much for having this program.
Sure.
Welcome. Sure. Go ahead. What's your question or your comment?
Well, the comment about gun control?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, I really absolutely feel that either the entire humanity has to be de-gunned or de-gunning the population is the most amazing crime because it just gives the very dark governments who are controlling our world the opportunity to have the biggest ignition and guns and military to rule people as they already are, and to take the people's guns away is the first thing they want in order to control the slave population all the way through. And as I'm learning, they are setting up all these school shootings. It's government controlled.
So what you're saying is that you do not want people to be disarmed by government, or what?
No, they should not be disarmed by government.
Okay.
Okay. Bernie, you
Fair
want to
enough.
say something?
Yeah, I agree with the idea that, indeed, I think is in our Second Amendment, the idea that we must be able to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government. And I think one of the problems is the difference of force that our military and our government and our police forces possess versus what the citizenry has right now. That's a no match. I don't see it actually ever coming down to a gunfight with our government.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, they're taking over the world. They're killing millions of people with advanced military beyond our imagination. And here we are sitting down. It's like, okay, let's put our last resort of even the little guns that we can have at home for a little fight away too. So you give them total power.
Let's take away the guns of the military. I think you're saying I like that idea as well.
That's the first thing. I mean, all these issues all over the internet, in the social media, talking about, whether we should have guns or not. The entire conversation has to shift. The conversation is about how we are going to disarm the military dark governments that are destroying our lives, our nations, our earth, by explosions under the oceans, atomic bombs, and on and on and on. And here we are wasting our time whether we should have guns in our hands.
Do you have a gun?
I unfortunately don't, but I'm thinking about it.
Oh, you are?
Uh-huh.
Would you like the idea of our community, those who have guns, coming together to form a West Marin militia that would be in service to our local people to protect and defend? Would you like that sort of thing?
That would be exactly what the police force at the beginning would have been right to do. So yes, if the police is now a military organization against the people, of course, it would be beautiful if we come to, if the citizens come together with the right intention, with clear hearts, that, hey, we are here to protect, we are here for the good cause. Here are our guns. Here is the training we are willing to go through, not just with the guns, but training of self-defense or whatever it takes. Training our children, training our women, training our young men rather than sitting in front of their video games and whatever, training them so that they actually become strong, spirited warriors in this life. And put that whole, it's like the gay issue. I mean, it's all over everything until the gay issue wins when there are so many other issues way more important than that. You wonder what is the agenda of this satanic government.
Well, we don't have to actually wonder too much, do we?
What?
I don't think we have to really wonder too much. The idea of maintaining control of the hierarchy is pretty standard procedure of most governments, and that's what the people who founded this country were working against and were hoping to protect us against. And I think in some ways they have we have succumbed to allowing, again, a government bigger than the people can control.
Thank you so much for calling in. I believe we just cut you off accidentally.
No, I didn't.
Did we? Oh, no. Thank you.
Still here, and thank you so much for opening up this discussion. We need this and many other deeper discussions about what's going on, because as much as we think people are aware, I mean, what I'm seeing in Marin, West Marin, or wherever in these areas is a lot of new agey ideas, very ungrounded, don't want to hear anything negative, and this all is negative to most people.
Right.
Excellent ideas expressed.
Thank you, Mariam.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So I mean, this is quite a big subject, and the more I researched into it, the bigger it got. And I have pretty strong opinions about guns, but it's such a new subject for me that I've been researching it heavily and getting more and more down into the rabbit hole. And I have to say that, you know, the reason why I chose this topic for the radio show was because of the homicide that we had in Fairfax, where apparently some kids, some young people, white people, got hold of a gun from a stolen car, stole a gun from a car in San Francisco and shot 2 people within 48 hours, one of which, I think it was a semi-automatic, because the man was shot 15 times with one weapon. And so, you know, that really brought it home for me. That's the first homicide we've had, a gun shooting in Fairfax, in over 100 years. And then I also wanted to mention that, you know, my own experience, well, there was the armed robbery we had in Point Reyes as well. I was pretty shocked about that, because that was with a gun, wasn't it? And then, you know, my son's 7, and I've pulled him out of 4 different schools, including a homeschooling group, because of gun violence directed at my 7-year-old. That's other kids holding my son down, trying to shoot him with a stick. Not a real gun, but it doesn't matter, because my son is at that dream state between 5, 6, and 7 years old, where he doesn't really understand that they're not actually going to shoot him and kill him.
Everything's real.
I understand that. We did that all the time, and we didn't even need a stick. We just stick out your hand with your top 2 fingers, and you wrap your bottom 2 fingers to look like a gun, and you go bang, bang. I mean, that is something our culture has taught me, at least, at a very early age.
Well, I personally don't want it happening to my son. Anyway, we have another caller.
We have a caller, yes. Hi, you're on Let's Talk on KWMR. What's your name, please?
Hi, my name is John.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Welcome.
Hi. I just read about, you know, I got an email about your radio show, and I wanted to make a comment that I think is kind of important. I'm in my mid-60s. And many, many, many years ago, I taught people how to shoot pistols. I ran a little gun school, and we taught safety, and we were very good. We weren't a bunch of cowboys. I've never shot at or shot a mammal, nor have I ever broken a law in my life with a pistol. Also, coming from a big city, up until recently, I was pretty much, and still am, in favor of strong gun control, like in New York City, where you have the Sullivan Law, because you really don't want people running around with handguns. And in reality, you don't want somebody next door shooting at a shadow, and the bullet goes through the wall and shoots you.
Yep.
I also think that these crazy people that are out there shooting the kids or shooting each other up, I mean, these are sick, crazy people, and it's a terrible thing. But I believe that we've gone overboard, or we are going overboard with gun control, particularly due to something that happened to me a year and a half ago. And I'd like to explain it very briefly.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay? First and foremost, I have never broken a law with a gun. I've shot a lot of tin cans. I taught people to shoot pistols. I am totally good. I owned a couple of pistols. I got drunk and got in an argument with my girlfriend and broke a window. There was no guns around. Okay, she called the police, and the police arrested me. I was drunk on private property, and as they should have, they hauled me away to jail, and that's what they did. I pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor that I broke her window. It was called disorderly conduct. Well, the sentence was that I was on probation, but I was not allowed to own or possess a gun for 3 years. Now, this had nothing to do with guns. What then happens is you turn in your pistol, which was a very valuable pistol, and if you don't get it out within 6 months, it's, quote, disposed of. So basically, they took my pistol. So to avoid them disposing of it, okay, I wound up selling it through a gun dealer for like a third of the price. But essentially, they took a valuable gun away from me for breaking a window.
Yeah.
And here's the last part of the story, which is utterly amazing. Okay, fine. They've taken the gun. I move. I'm living in a house, which is kind of a large communal house. I'm living upstairs. And the gun has been sold. The gun is not in my possession. It's been sold. It's gone. Okay, well, I just break a window. I get it. Two of my housemates run upstairs and say, John, the house is surrounded. There are police looking for you. I said, what? Yeah, they're looking for you. I thought it was a joke. Then they come back up and knock, and sure enough, there are all these cops outside of my house. I said, go outside. I say, hi. They said, oh, you're not in any trouble. And there are like 6 of them. And they said, well, we understand you have a pistol. They tell me about my pistol. I said, listen, this thing disappeared 2 months ago. It's been sold. The San Rafael police had the pistol. So apparently they were sent from San Francisco, and the best description of this police group was they were not the A-team. To make the story short, I kind of felt like there was more going on than protecting the public from a window breaker.
Yeah, that forfeiture of private property that you're talking about, we know happens in terms of them taking entire homes and real estate. And, in this case, it was a gun that they took from you. That doesn't seem right, does it?
I don't agree. I actually think that's domestic violence that you're talking about. You committed domestic violence against a woman who's weaker than you. I'd gladly take your gun away.
Well, I want to comment on that, about the woman that's weaker than me. I'm 5'9", I weighed 195 pounds. The woman that was weaker than me was 5'10", was a Qigong expert.
Yeah, well, maybe.
That's an exception.
Most violence is... There's huge statistics for women and domestic violence and guns. Most guns are owned by men and used against women. And so I don't think that, if you're going to break a window and use your physical violence, you shouldn't have a gun.
Because I broke a window.
Yes, because you broke a window.
It shouldn't be taken away from him. He should be able to get it back at the end of 3 years.
If he's a licensed gun owner. But, it sounds like anger issues are a problem, and an angry guy with a gun is a dangerous guy, I would say.
But I didn't have a gun. I mean, what if...
That's right, you don't anymore.
Should they take away my driver's license?
Well, you could do a background check and a psychological evaluation, and then maybe you can get your gun back.
Yeah.
But thank
anyway,
you for calling in.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the call.
I just wanted you to see the other side of this.
Yeah, good.
It's really good input. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
So much.
Thanks for calling.
So there's 300 million. There's no real statistics on gun ownership in this country because that's proprietary information. So it's estimated that there's 300 million privately owned firearms in the United States. That's 106 million handguns, 100 million rifles, 83 million shotguns, which is about 1 gun per American. Most Americans, though, don't own guns, and those that do, there's just a few that do. I can't remember, 20% own something like 2/3 of guns.
Well, I've heard that is going down. The number of people actually owning guns is becoming less, but the number of guns is increasing.
People are stockpiling. Yeah, they are. It seems. And, apparently, another shocking fact was there was a sharp increase in gun sales right after Obama was elected. Just going to let that sink in.
Well, we know that racism exists, and there was a greater fear that their guns would be taken away, and that the liberal policies would keep them from buying guns in the future.
It's the downfall of the state when a black guy is elected president.
Sake. No civilian population is more powerfully armed than the U.S. I think we have the highest rate of civilian gun ownership in the world. The second highest is Switzerland, I believe. But Bernie, you have some statistics on that.
Well, I do. That idea of one gun per person, like we were mentioning, means there's 88.8 guns per 1,000 people. And then in that regard, we're more than twice as much as Switzerland and Finland. And then in homicides, our statistic on a graph sticks out way above everything else in terms of this 3.2 homicides per 100,000 people. Or that comes down to, I think, about let's see, how many did I come up with? It's about 300 a day. We're having homicides at a rate above any other culture in terms of
That's right.
the proportion.
This is gun homicide.
So that there definitely appears to be a correlation. More guns, more death by gun.
I mean, men are much more likely to own guns than women. And although it's 1 in 2 men, apparently, that own a gun, believe it or not. And then it's supposedly 1 in 10 women, although it's unclear what those stats are. But apparently that's due to an aggressive marketing campaign by the NRA and other pro-gun companies who are working hard to expand into this new market of arming women.
These little pink guns you were talking about.
Yeah, the little pink guns with the sexy holsters.
Think that there might even be more guns in the hands of more males if it wasn't for the women. So thank goodness my wife has never allowed me to have a gun in the house, and that's probably saved me.
So gun ownership is much, much higher among whites than among blacks, believe it or not, and it's much higher among older men than young people. So a lot of these school shootings have taken place with boys that have stolen their dad's gun or taken their uncle's gun. Yes, Bernie?
That black-white thing, we can't help but on TV see images of white men having the holster or having the gun strapped across their back, and they're exercising their Second Amendment freedoms, and they're boldly going into a crowd or a presidential debate. Have you ever seen a black man dare to do that? I mean, I don't think in this country a black man arming himself and showing guns that way would live very long, and that's a
but 3 in 10
indictment.
3 out of 10 gun owners are black. So why is there's an overwhelming amount of marketing and advertising targeted at white people, white men? And why is that? That's their core target, actually, is young white men.
So should we be drawing a line between in what kinds of guns we're talking about? Are we talking about handguns or semi-automatic, AR-15s or, AK-47s? Or are we talking about hunting guns? Are we talking 22s for plinking? There are many different kinds of guns, and I lived in a couple of places in the U.S. You and I, Raven, were both brought up in a country without guns, basically, and even the police didn't have guns, so it's alien to us anyway. But I lived in the country here in California, where ranchers, of course, always have a gun on the gun rack in their pickup. Well, they used to; they can't do it anymore. But on their own land, they have guns all the time because there are situations where, like putting a cow out of its misery or something, or a horse or something like that. Or
shooting a wolf?
A wolf, yeah. If there were any wolves, they would, but coyotes for sure, yeah, and all that. But, there are instances where guns, if you lived in grizzly bears, I have a great email from Mark Dowie, who is a gun owner. He has a rifle and a .357 Magnum because he used to live in a remote corner of Wyoming, it says, and that was grizzly country, and you're out there and, last resort, what do? Do you say stop?
Well, I think your point about the different kinds of guns is definitely important. Yeah. It's not just a minor nuance, because handguns are what are mostly used in these homicides, more so than the rifles. And then with the rifles, the difference between a hunting rifle and an assault weapon, but unfortunately in our country, when lawmakers are trying to put more restrictions on assault weapons, which we had for a while, both in terms of manufacturing and selling and all that, the gun manufacturers lobby, the NRA, has been so politically adept because of the good funding that they've had, and I'd say good political skills. I mean, in terms of lobbying, who does better than the NRA?
You can't discriminate against guns that are designed only to kill people. You have to allow all weapons or none at all.
Wouldn't it be better if we were having the more nuanced discussion about assault weapons, hunting rifles, and handguns?
Shotguns.
Yeah.
I mean,
for-
there's the
yeah,
incident
for
of
hunting.
Australia, though, which it seems to indicate that more restrictive gun laws do make a difference. The country had 4 mass shootings between 1987 and 96, and then after those incidences, public opinion turned against gun ownership and Parliament passed stricter gun laws. So rapid-fire rifles and shotguns were banned, and the gun owner licensing was tightened, and the remaining firearms were registered to national standards. And in the last 19 years since that legislation was passed, apparently there's been no mass shootings, and the risk of dying by gunshot dropped by 50%. The suicide by firearm rates dropped by 80%.
Yeah, there you go.
New York State also has done a good job, as have a couple other states, of tightening up on gun control laws and actually experience a decrease and lesser rates than states where there are no restrictions on the purchase. And so we do have the evidence that shows that through legislation you can force a situation of less guns and less gun violence.
Right.
But to bring it back to the United Kingdom, because I also looked up that incident, I don't know if you remember, but in 1987 we had the Hungerford shooting, which was a mass shooting. A 43-year-old man broke into a school in Hungerford and shot 16 children aged 6 and 7 years old, and the 43-year-old mother teacher. And after that, we never really had, as you said, growing up, it wasn't the policemen didn't have guns, they had batons and
a truncheon.
Yeah, they had a truncheon, a pretty, not very scary really. And
What is a truncheon?
it's just a big baton
club.
thing that you can club.
Oh.
I mean, it hurts, so you could definitely knock
So
you
riot
out.
control police in this country use batons.
Yes, they call them batons here.
Yeah,
We call
with
them
a shield in
truncheons.
one hand and a baton in the other, and then you can club students with it.
Yeah, no, they're very effective, but they didn't really use them a lot in England growing up.
Yeah.
It was,
But at least it's not irreversible like shooting the victims. I mean, at least with a
Right.
beating, you're breaking up the whatever you want to break up.
So, but then, after that particularly vicious mass shooting, and England's not known for its mass shootings, America is, but, we had this law passed called the Firearms Amendment Act of 1997, which banned the private possession of all modern firearms, even for competitive sporting purposes. And there were firearm amnesties across the UK, which resulted in the surrender of thousands of firearms and rounds of ammunition. However, I looked up that, and even though there was that ban, and we also have the Prevention of Crime Act, 1953, that stops people from carrying any kind of offensive weapon, including firearms and knives. But the truth is that violent homicides by gun and knives is actually on the rise in the UK, despite that legislation.
So they're getting hold of it's
an
glory
underground.
of the glory of the EU is
Well,
that you can
apparently
get guns
you can
anywhere.
get guns anywhere in Europe, exactly. And then since we're talking about that, I didn't know this because I thought if you wanted a gun in the US, you had to get a license and a
background
permit
check.
and a background check. And apparently that's true if you're working with a licensed dealer. But here's what I found out online was that 7 million guns a year are bought without a background check. That's about half of all annual gun sales because of this thing called the gun show loophole,
Sure.
which is where you can buy a gun without a license or a background check from any one of these thousands of gun shows around the country. And you can also, I looked on Craigslist here, you can actually buy them on Craigslist or private dealers online in the street. And so 50% of all gun sales are unregulated.
We could do it on West Marin Commons Marketplace.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
You could actually,
Yeah.
So this is the question. Call us 415-663-8492.
Can I ask about the England example? Tying it back to our first caller who was talking about needing guns to counter a tyranny by the government. Do you think Americans are better able to, at some point, fight off a tyrannical governance system than the British because the British having less guns?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're talking about the military here. The government has access to unbelievable weaponry, and a few guns and machine guns aren't going to make any difference.
Just more blood.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so if you own guns, do you oppose regulation completely? And again, Mark Dowie he said somebody asked him, where do you stand on gun control? And he said, I'm all for it. This is a gun owner. Strictly enforced legislation should outlaw the possession of any weapon designed for uses other than hunting and personal safety, by which I mean assault weapons. They're for killing people, and should we not regulate that? Hi, caller. Welcome to Let's Talk on KWMR. What's your name, please?
It's Lyons.
Hi, Lions.
Hi, Lions.
And my topic is precisely that, the question of licensing and regulation. I've, over many years I've known lots of people who hunt for food, and that seems to me a perfectly reasonable thing to do. This is not a perfect analogy, but a car is also a potentially dangerous weapon. We don't have any Second Amendment rights around it, so that, of course, makes the question of, talking about guns extraordinarily complex because our Constitution is wrapped up in it. But if I could set that aside for a moment, at least at the beginning, one needs to go through training and get a license,
right,
and periodically get your license and your driving skills, or at least your vision, reviewed. So we have a sense of we need to pay attention to who's using a car, under what circumstances. Now, of course, there are plenty of crazy people driving cars on the road, as there are, sadly, some crazy people using guns.
But we have systems in place to help regulate bad driving.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And I wish we could come to some agreement about registering guns and some background check. I mean, there are other things in our system that we require checks on.
That's true.
I think guns should fall into that, and I'm not a gun user myself, although as a young person in a summer camp, I learned how to target shoot.
Mm-hmm.
My assumption is any gun owner who is, thinking would say yes. We need some kind of registration.
Some kind of regulation on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you, but one of the problems with that is that we have the NRA, which is a huge, massive, the largest lobby organization apparently now in the U.S., and they are fronting an $11.7 billion industry here in the U.S., which is the arms industry. And the arms industry is, why wouldn't they want background checks? They don't want background checks because it affects their bottom line. So we're up against that big corporate machine again.
Yes. And again, because the Second Amendment of the Constitution is involved, it's just grotesquely complicated.
It is, yeah.
Lyons, I wanted to ask you another point. I have a little trouble with us saying this person is allowed to have a gun, this person is not. And, of course, we think drawing that line has to do with mental illness, your arrest records, whether someone's got a restraining order on you, or various other criteria. But we've seen how the law has been used to put more people of color in prisons, and then once you've got a felony and then you can't get a gun, it appears that in the end, more white people will probably have guns than people of color, and that this licensing thing is somewhat arbitrary. Aren't we all on a continuum of mental illness? I mean, I know I am.
Well, I go back to my perhaps poor analogy of having a driver's license.
Yeah.
So the driving test is really the key, right? So.
Yes, but
But they don't really check your arrest records. You could have had a felony and still get a driver's license.
Well, and I think is it the case that if you've got a felony, you're limited in what elections you can participate in?
Yes.
No vote. Right. So lots of inequities here. I don't think we recognize vehicles as being as dangerous as they actually are.
Well, that's very true. Thank you so much for calling in, Lyons.
Great show. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Hi, you're on Let's Talk on KWMR. What's your name, please?
Hey, my name is Stephen. I live in Marshall.
Stephen.
Hi, Stephen.
I think I know you, maybe.
Yeah, I want to tell you this is a great show.
Thank you.
And I'm glad everybody's doing it. And I just want to call your attention to a October 19th issue in the New Yorker by Malcolm Gladwell called The Thresholds of Violence.
Uh-huh.
He investigates these mass killings in the schools. And it's a long article, but the upshot is he thinks he demonstrates that a lot of these are inspired by each other, and they're copycat.
The copycat effect.
Yeah, and they get inspiration from each other. In particular, Columbine. Columbine is one of the primary acts of violence that people take their
inspiration from.
Inspiration from. Thank you.
Well,
Well, it was
they're trying to
successful.
get more notoriety through the media, especially social media plays a part in this, in hyping it up. They're going not just for a higher body count, these killers, apparently. And 2015, by the way, has been the most violent, the most mass shootings ever. We've had 294 mass shootings.
Really?
And that is... I think it has something to do with social media and this copycat effect that you're talking about. These people, and they're white men, I think we should say that, they're 98% of them are white men, are wanting to one-up the other killers, do it in a more sensational way.
They're
And
white kids, really.
they're kids, but they want their 5 seconds of fame. This is one way to get their name and their, their media coverage. It's something along those lines.
There was one interview with somebody who felt, he's one that didn't end up killing someone, but he felt like you have to murder your parents first.
Good grief.
That gives you street cred.
Wow.
This glorification takes place a lot, does it not, in our movies and TV? I mean, I see ads all the time that are every problem is solved with guns and violence and shooting, and then these video games are so realistic now. That all feeds into that same need of, well, or not need, but the boys with testosterone are going to want to act out. But do we really want them to have access to guns?
Yeah.
There's a thought that I just want to plant here. When a person carries a gun, in some sense, they're given the power of life and death. And when they shoot it at somebody, it's really the death penalty that they're inflicted.
Yeah.
And I just think of this scenario. Guns on campus, it's evening, it's dusk. A woman is walking by herself. A man comes up to greet her. He puts his arms around her. Now, you got a guy that's got a gun on him, and he looks at that, what's happening, and he has to decide instantaneously in the dark whether or not this woman is being accosted or not. And if he decides that, he's got this gun, he pulls out the gun. She may just be seeing a friend of hers who ran into her on campus, put his arm around her, gave her a hug. This guy might not be able to see the interaction that's happening at night. He has a split second to decide whether he's going to shoot this guy.
So you're saying the margin error is quite high.
Quite.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are nuanced situations all the time in life, and how can you make snap decisions? And if you have a gun handy or any other weapon, I guess, but a gun especially, because you can do it from long range, it's a difficult question.
Yeah, thanks for calling
Thank you,
in.
Stephen.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
I mean, let me give you some of these fun facts about mass shootings. So as of October the 1st, that's when I last looked, there's been 294 mass shootings here in the U.S.
That's about one a day, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's defined as an incident in which 4 or more people are killed or injured by a gun. And by the way, it doesn't count domestic violence incidents. So if you shoot me and our 3 children and my mother, it doesn't count. So, and there's plenty of those too, but they don't count on this particular poll. And neither does gang violence for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But, so we have more public mass shootings here in the States than any other country in the world. We have 5% of the world's population and 31% of all mass shootings.
Mass shooting, let's define mass shooting. What is a mass
It just
shooting?
did. It's 4 or more people killed or injured by a gun.
Yeah.
I heard that's
And
an
so-
FBI standard where that's just what they draw the line at.
Okay.
And people in the US, people have a much greater chance of dying in a mass shooting if you're at work or at school, because that's where most of them take place. And overseas, apparently, there are mass killings, not as many as here, but they tend to happen near military installations. And overseas, the shooter typically has one gun, but in this country, they typically have more than one firearm. And
plenty of magazines. To go
I
along
also, found some really shocking statistics about guns and schools and guns and kids. And on the Gun Violence Archive, which is a website you can go and look up, apparently this year 559 children under 11 years old have been killed or injured with guns this year. I just find that just shocking.
Yeah.
And, like October the 6th, an 11-year-old boy in Tennessee shot and killed an 8-year-old girl with his father's loaded rifle because she wouldn't let him play with her puppy. And then on another one on the same day, October 6th, an 11-year-old boy shot and killed his 12-year-old brother after picking up one of his parents' 3 loaded guns that were sitting next to him on the picnic table. And then we have toddler shootings, which is a whole other thing. I was like, really? There's 209 shootings involving children 4 years old and younger in the U.S., and there's at least 43 of those shootings have been toddlers under 3. And, for example, a 20-month-year-old toddler shot himself with his grandmother's handgun in August in St. Louis. In August in Alabama, a 2-year-old shot his dad in the head and killed him. And April this year in Cleveland, a 3-year-old boy shot his 1-year-old brother in the head and killed him. And the common denominator with all of these hideous killings is that the guns were left unsecured and loaded at home in a place where these kids obviously don't know what they're doing at that age. You don't know what you're doing.
It's like you take the ignition keys out of your car so that no one can use it, right?
Yes.
Why not put a take the magazine out, whatever.
It's crazy.
So,
anyway.
And the parents are responsible for having the kids have access to it, but I'd say that our culture also has already at many of those ages shown them images of people using a gun to solve a problem. And so I think it's a combination of things. Clearly, we must require that those people who would be licensed to be able to own a gun and then have their guns registered, have them also secure at all times and unavailable for toddlers or even their teenage kids or even in their 20s. I mean, I'm told that our brains aren't fully formed until, 68? Oh.
I mean, when Michael Moore did that film, Bowling for Columbine, back in 2002, I remember him saying that it was, I have this quote, and he said it was about fear. I'll just read this quote. "We are a people easily manipulated by fear, which causes us to arm ourselves. We are a nation founded in violence, grew our borders through violence, and allow men in power to use violence around the world to further our so-called American corporate interests. The gun, not the eagle, is our true national symbol," which I think is a fair quote. But when I looked further into his film, he said that he looked at media and didn't find a correlation between growing gun violence and school shootings, etc. in this country and media. But that has not been my experience with my son. The boys, and they were all boys, that have tortured my son, tied him up, threatened to kill him, albeit in an imagination, with guns, were all players of Minecraft, Pokemon, and I did my own research. They're all and kids as young as 2 and 3 years old are playing these games, and these are games where you're looking down the barrel of a gun and shooting.
Right.
And that is
so easy.
It's so easy. So then you see a gun on your dad's table, or you know it's in your mum's drawer, and it's a gun. It's something you've been playing with in the media, and it's harmless, and you don't really understand that it can kill anybody.
Yeah.
This is KWMR Weekly Let's Talk call-in show with co-hosts Raven Gray, Paul Raffel, and Bernie Steffen. So you can still join our conversation simply by calling 415-663-8492.
Yeah, and if you're anti-regulation, call in and let us know why you think that way or what it would mean to not be able to walk into a store or into a dealer or into anywhere and just buy a gun. And is that really the Second Amendment? Is that really the spirit of the Second Amendment, that everyone should have any gun they want, any weapon they want?
In that quote you read, Raven, it occurred to me that we shouldn't probably draw a bright line in our talking about this subject between our military and then the domestic gun issues, because as a nation in the news, we're always setting the example of how we solve problems with these other cultures and peoples that don't know what they're doing, and we have to go in there and teach them, and we do it with guns.
We kill a bunch of them. That'll teach them.
The summary of the gun debate, as I saw it, was that they have to gun control advocates on one side who say that the answer to gun violence is we need fewer guns, tighter regulations, and the gun rights advocates on the other side say that the answer is more guns, that things would be better if everyone is armed. And so the gun rights advocates like the NRA, I think the CEO, I've forgotten his name, said guns don't kill people, people kill people. And that we just need to track these lunatics and make sure they can't get hold of any dangerous guns. And then the gun control advocates say the problem isn't people, it's the fact that there's more and more of these dangerous military-style firearms that are just accessible unlawfully to everyone, and we need tighter gun regulations overall. In fact, Michael Moore said it wasn't guns don't kill people, it's Americans kill people. But I would go further than that and say, no, it's actually, it's American men. So, I mean, that's the big elephant in the room that when I was researching for this, I was like, well, why isn't anybody talking about that? 98% of the school shootings are by white men, but the mass shootings, I mean, and almost all the homicides, whether you're black or white, are done by men. 90% are perpetrated by men. Wait, here we go. Here's estimated that there are 12 murder-suicides a week in the U.S. 90% are perpetrated by men. 80% of the victims are women. And more than 1,600 women were murdered by men in 2013, and the most common weapon used was a handgun. And by the way, that risk is 2.5 to 3 times higher if you're a woman of color. And most of these murders are considered domestic violence. They don't even make it into the news, guys.
Wow.
Because, here's another one. Having a gun in a domestic violence situation, which is why that previous caller's gun was taken away, increases statistically a woman's risk of being killed by 500%. Women are also twice as likely as men to die in any of these mass school shootings. 64% of all mass murders are women and children. I don't know. I just think, we need gun controls, I believe, and a better understanding of how media sensationalizes murders and makes it kind of cool. And we definitely need to understand mental illness and effective treatment. And I would argue, are we talking about crazy people here, or is it the society itself that's crazy? But we really also need a much bigger conversation about white supremacy and misogyny. Patriarchy, which leads us to our next show next week.
Well, you're making excellent points, Raven. I totally agree that this is a male thing. And before there were this many guns available to boys, there were maybe more fistfights. I mean, the idea that a young man is not going to get in a dispute with another young man, that idea of bucking horns or establishing your right in the pecking order within the species, I mean, that's in us as mammals. And it goes a lot with the male side. It's just that when we didn't have the guns, there'd be other ways of solving the problem. The gun, unfortunately, is so powerful, it overwhelms every other effort.
But you're saying this is simply male aggression. It's due to testosterone.
Not simply. I'm saying you can't ignore that. I mean, that's why there are more men doing this than women doing this, I think. But I think the availability of the guns are there to the women. The women aren't choosing, and the culture hasn't reinforced the idea that women solve problems by resorting to physical violence.
Well, certainly the pervasiveness of graphically violent forms of entertainment are actually all geared towards boys and men as well.
Well, yeah. So here's a little story. Back in the 70s when I was sailing around the world as a vagabond, mostly on British flag vessels, there was kind of a thing that you were always careful about mooring close to an American vessel, an American yacht, because you knew they always had guns on board. And there was a guy, this thing really brought it home to me. There was a guy pulled up to, we were down in Mexico, we were down in, Acapulco, I think it was. This guy pulls up to a mooring buoy, ties up to it in the evening, because he didn't want to go into the marine or whatever. He just tied up to this buoy, didn't know whose it was, didn't get permission or all that. It was an American vessel. About 4 a.m, the fishing boat comes back in, and he comes into his buoy to try and tie up to his buoy, and there's this American vessel. So he hails him, "Hello, Captain!" And the captain comes up with a gun.
No way.
Yeah, it's his first instinct. As an American, I have to say, an American male, the first instinct is that you're afraid of anyone who calls you out at 3 a.m, and what you need to do is come up with a gun. And of course, it escalated because he didn't declare his guns when he came into Mexico. So he was hauled off to jail, which was great. But it brought it home right then.
I mean, the other day I was driving back from. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but anyway, I was driving back from Fairfax, and I was driving driving too fast already on the Samuel P. Taylor, Sir Francis Drake. I was already doing over the speed limit, and this guy came up to me in a Mustang behind me and was right up my backside, and I couldn't safely pull over. And he overtook me doing about 60, 65, and I was so angry, and my son's in the back seat, and I was like, I'm going to keep it clean, but I swore. And then I wanted to, raise my fist and give him, the salute. And Zach said, no, don't. That's my son in the back. He said, don't, Mama, he might have a gun.
Yeah.
He's right.
And I thought, gosh, he's right. Okay, slow down, calm the road rage.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I wanted to ask a question. James Bond, what nationality was he?
Well, he's Scottish, Sean Connery was Scottish, James Bond.
Okay, well, we were picking on Americans here. I just wanted to make sure.
He only carried a Beretta.
Well, there is this link with guns and sex, and it's sexy and it's power. And, we live in this system of patriarchal power structures. It's a culture of guns and violence. It extends to England. It extends to Australia, New Zealand. Guns give men power, and now more increasingly so women as well. And I just wanted to say that, perhaps it would be an interesting study if we did, to find out if men with big, powerful guns have small penises or if they are sexually inadequate. And, wouldn't that be an interesting study? Are people using guns for their own inadequacies?
As an extension. Yes, well, the bigger the gun, right?
Right.
The smaller the member. Speaking of which, it's also hunting season out on the bay. Yes.
What about giving our number out to see if any last people want to call in?
415-663-8492. Call in. Give us your opinions. Pro, con, regulations, no regulations. Should we just allow this to carry on? Do you have a gun? Do you not have a gun? Are guns necessary? Are you a hunter? Is that the way you feed your family? That's a wonderful thing. Okay.
We were earlier talking about comparing guns to automobiles and the licensing and control and stuff, but cars also are used by young men to show their prowess by burning rubber, doing donuts, just like you were experiencing on the road. That is not uncommon for young men to express their rage, their competitiveness, and so we clearly have other tools that we men use to do that, and clearly guns are unfortunately way too lethal.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, they don't necessarily prove their prowess by running someone over, right?
No.
And we have a last-minute caller here.
Hi, caller. You're on Let's Talk on KWR. What's your name, please?
Oh, hello. This is Pamela.
Hi, Pamela.
Hi, Mum.
Just have a comment, really, because, when one reads the press and looks at the headlines and things like that, it appears that a lot of the gun violence is in the black communities. And I wanted to make the point, of course you've had a lot of statistics showing that's not the case, but I wanted to make the point that when it does appear that that's the case, the problem is not to do with the color of the people, it's to do with the level of poverty, the inability to earn a living, the need to go into drug trafficking, to make any kind of money for the family. And all those things combine to give a very dangerous situation, fighting with gangs and so forth. And my contention is that if there were similar communities of very, very poor, struggling white families, or families of any color for that matter, exactly the same problems would arise. It has nothing really to do with the color of the people. It has to do with the situations in which they are forced to live.
Right. It's just scarier for all us white folks when those black folks are armed, and it makes the news. That's what gets on the news, right?
Yes.
But it's racism expressing itself.
Sure, of course.
Well, like I said, 3 out of 10 gun owners are black, so that means 7 out of 10 are actually white, because hardly any Latinos apparently own guns, and they don't really have any homicides or mass shootings. But I did look up the statistics that black Americans, they're twice as likely to be killed by a gun than a white person. And let's see.
Part of that might be the law, where in the past we've seen in the South that you hardly ever convict a white person for killing a black person, but a black person killing another black person or killing a white person.
Well, black people weren't even allowed guns, were they, until fairly recently in history?
Not while they were slaves.
Right.
You can't have slaves with guns.
Gun violence definitely divides America by race as well as gender.
So thank
Do you
you.
agree, though, that it's partly the conditions in which these
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I definitely agree.
really to do with colour? It has to do with poverty.
Yeah.
It has to do with poverty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've got the racism layer over it, and that's why the media is continuing to reinforce
Right.
that
Yeah.
view.
That's why it gets reported so
Yeah.
much. You're right. Because some of the statistics you've used in the program about white shootings don't really hit the press at all.
Well,
Right.
see,
The spectacular ones do, but not.
Pamela, you make a really good point. Every day now, we said on average one mass killing, the 4 or more, but there's 82 killings in the United States every day.
Every day.
And you mentioned the toddlers, you mentioned the kids, and so in every way, shape, or form where violence is expressed, guns are a part of that. So there's just way too many killings in this country every day.
And not just in this country, but also abroad. Let's never forget that. It's a violent society. It's a government that tends towards violence, and it just seems to be part of the history of the United States, and it's maintained.
And of course,
Growing.
the U.S. is the largest manufacturer and seller of arms in the world.
So good for the
followed
economy.
closely by France and Britain and Russia.
Really?
It's the ironic thing, really, isn't it? We make the weapons and sell them to anybody who wants them, and then we send our armies out to fight the people who've been armed by the guns that we've produced.
Good for business.
They got to use up the bullets and the bombs.
Yeah, right.
Make more.
Make more. Anyway, that was my point. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much
Pamela.
for calling.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. I mean, back to the school shootings. We had, there was a survey done in 2013 that found 3 in 10 high school males carried a weapon, a gun, in the last month. It's the leading cause of death for teens aged 15. No, it's third leading cause of death, sorry, for teens aged 15 to 19. And, like I said, there have been 52 school shootings this year. I'm not going to mention them because they're just horrible, aren't they? They're just hideous. Yeah. And the gun rights activists like the NRA have said, what you need is for teachers to be armed. Yeah. Every teacher has a firearm and everybody has a gun in school. And in fact, they've actually pushed through legislation that forces colleges and universities to allow concealed guns on campus. And Jerry Brown just recently put a law into effect that we cannot have concealed weapons here in the state of California. Yes.
You mentioned, and a lot of people do, that the NRA represents gun owners, but I think we've learned now that really they represent the gun manufacturers more.
Absolutely.
And so in the end, they're about a business that sells, and they want to sell to everyone. Sure. So clearly it's almost like a marketing campaign.
Yeah,
everyone should have a gun.
Well, I was saying the only thing, it's LaPierre, that was his name, the NRA chief.
Wayne LaPierre.
Yeah, thank you. He said the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, which is a very convenient way of saying everybody needs a gun and opens up the market for the gun industry and expands their own power base.
And you need more than one gun.
Yeah, and you need more than one gun. They've got their own program called Eddie Eagle, which they're pushing through gun safety in schools. They're putting it through the national curriculum. But I looked at it. It glamorizes guns and gun culture. And then you've got somebody else on the other side called Straight Talk About Risks. They have a program about gun risks and anger management. But, that's been criticized because it says that guns are bad. But, I mean, both sides want this gun education in schools from kindergarten up. I don't.
No.
Anyway,
it's
pretty much time for the end of our show. Thank you all for calling in. Thank for our listeners and callers for your participation. I hope you'll tune in every Thursday at 11 a.m. because your voice really does matter.